In early March of 2022, a teenage boy was shot and killed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The incident happened in broad daylight, behind a diner. No one called 911 immediately. By the time police arrived, the boy was already on the ground, face up. No signs of a fight. No weapon recovered at the scene. No suspect in custody. His name was Josue Ruiz. People who knew him called him Jay. He was 16 years old, a high school student, a dishwasher at Lindy's Diner. He had a girlfriend. She was pregnant with their child. That day, he left his shift mid-morning and never returned. 10 minutes later, he was dead. According to witnesses, several teenagers were seen near the alley shortly before the shooting. One of them was wearing a graduation gown. After the gunshot, the group ran. Some toward a nearby school, one into a gold-colored sedan that left the area quickly. No one remained at the scene. No one provided a name. Initial reports suggested the shooting was connected to a dispute between Jay and his girlfriend's younger brother. There were text messages, some verbal warnings exchanged, but many of the details were unclear in the beginning, and some of them still are. This case would go on to involve multiple members of the same family, including Jay's girlfriend, her younger brother, and their mother, each of them, in different ways, connected to what happened that morning. Some directly, some indirectly, some through what they did, and some through what they didn't do. What follows is a closer look at the facts, the texts, the interviews, the timelines, the moments that led up to the shooting, and the choices made after it happened. This is not a dramatization. It's not about heroes or villains. It's about people, and the decisions that led to one teenager's death, and a family that fractured in the aftermath. Let's begin. At 11:19 a.m. on March 3, 2022, a call came into Albuquerque police reporting a possible shooting behind Lindy's Diner in the downtown area. The caller didn't give a name, they only said someone was down. Responding officers arrived within minutes. They found a teenage male lying on the ground in the alley behind the diner. He was unresponsive. There was visible blood near the chest. He was later identified as Josue Ruiz, age 16. He was wearing an apron. According to his coworkers, he had started his shift at the diner that morning as scheduled. They said he was quiet, focused, and showed no signs of distress before stepping out the back door around 11:10 a.m. He didn't clock out. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't come back. One of the diner employees went outside looking for him. They saw the police already at the scene. Paramedics confirmed Jay had died from a single gunshot wound to the torso. Investigators began canvassing the area. Several witnesses described a group of teenagers near the alley shortly before the shooting. One person recalled seeing someone in a graduation gown. Others reported hearing a single loud pop, followed by the sound of people running. A gold or tan sedan, possibly a Toyota or Nissan, was seen speeding away from the scene. Another individual fled toward a nearby charter school. Descriptions were limited and often inconsistent. Jay's phone was recovered at the scene. It was still active. Text messages had been exchanged shortly before his death, some of them with his girlfriend, Elizabeth. She was at home at the time, pregnant with their child. She later told detectives that the last message she received from him came at 11:11 a.m. That left less than 10 minutes between his last message and the fatal shot. Police marked several items at the scene. A single flip-flop, a broken phone charger, a faint blood trail. No weapon was found, no shell casing. The alley had no cameras. The surrounding buildings had poor visibility. It wasn't much to work with. In the early stages of the investigation, officers noted that the scene was unusually quiet. There was no evidence of a struggle, no signs of multiple gunshots, and no indication that the shooting had been interrupted or panicked. Some of the teenagers seen fleeing would later be identified, others weren't. At least one had direct ties to Jay's girlfriend's family, and that's where the investigation started to shift. From a shooting in an alley to something more complicated. A family dynamic, a set of text messages, and a plan that may have started long before Jay ever left the kitchen. Within hours of the shooting, detectives began assembling a timeline. The first step was Jay's phone. The last outgoing message was sent at 11:11 a.m., 9 minutes before the 911 call. That message went to his girlfriend, Elizabeth. She told police that Jay had asked her to make a doctor's appointment, that he seemed calm, focused, normal. But the messages found in his phone told a broader story. Jay had been texting multiple people that morning. There was ongoing communication between him and Elizabeth, but also with her younger brother, a 16-year-old named Angelo. Police recovered a group text thread referencing a plan to meet up in the alley. The language was casual. Phrases like "run ones," "be there at 11," and "don't jump me" were used. These are common expressions in informal teenage fights. The implication was that a one-on-one confrontation was being arranged. Jay appeared to believe that this would be a fist fight. No weapons, just him and Angelo settling something. The reason for the fight? That was less clear. Some of the texts suggested tensions between Jay and Angelo over Elizabeth. Others hinted at past arguments, trust issues, and insults exchanged online. Detectives traced other phones involved in the conversation. Several individuals had been included in the thread. Some confirmed they were supposed to be watching. Others said they were invited but didn't go. Police also interviewed witnesses who saw Jay in the alley just before the shooting. One remembered him pacing. Another said he was talking to a girl, calm. Nobody reported yelling. Nobody reported a struggle. And nobody claimed to have seen the gun. As the timeline came together, one detail stood out. Jay's decision to leave the diner, mid-shift, without telling anyone, suggested that he trusted what he was walking into. Whether he felt confident or just cornered isn't known. What is known is that he left work believing there was a set of rules, that there were boundaries, and that someone else didn't follow them. The more investigators examined the phones, the more one person's name kept reappearing. Elizabeth's mother, Elizabeth Chavez. She wasn't in the alley, but her name showed up in text conversations. She was referenced in calls. Some of the teens said she'd helped arrange the fight. One even claimed she told Angelo to handle it. The car that sped away from the alley, it was registered to her. Up to this point, police still hadn't identified a shooter, but they now had two things: a network of people who knew the fight was happening, and a parent who may have known about it too. What they didn't have was the gun or a confession. Not yet. The first formal interviews began later that day. Police spoke with Elizabeth, Jay's girlfriend. She was 6 months pregnant. She had not been at the scene. She said she'd been home all morning. She told detectives that Jay had been texting her, talking about the baby. He'd asked her to make a doctor's appointment. He'd reminded her to eat. She said it had been a normal morning until he stopped responding. She also mentioned the fight. She confirmed that Jay and her younger brother Angelo had agreed to meet, but she said she didn't think anything serious would happen. She said Jay had promised it would be just a quick fight. No weapons, no jumping. She denied that her mother had any involvement. "My mom didn't set this up," she said. "She wasn't even there." Next, detectives spoke with Angelo, the 16-year-old brother. He was quiet during the interview, nervous. He acknowledged the fight. He admitted he didn't like Jay. He said Jay had talked down to Elizabeth. He described the plan to meet in the alley, said he expected a one-on-one. But when asked what happened after that, his story became less clear. At first, he said he left before anything happened. Then he said he ran. Then he said he wasn't sure who had the gun. He denied bringing it, denied shooting, said he didn't know who did. The inconsistencies in Angelo's account raised concerns, but even more concerning was how closely his timeline matched Jay's final movements. Cell tower data confirmed that Angelo's phone had been in the alley at the time of the shooting. He had left the area minutes later, possibly in the gold sedan witnesses had described. Police then turned to the mother, Elizabeth Chavez. She agreed to speak. She told officers she'd been at a laundromat that morning. She said she didn't know about the fight until after it happened. When asked about her car, the gold sedan, she said it had broken down earlier in the week. But her story didn't align with what they'd already found. The car had been seen leaving the alley immediately after the shooting. Multiple teens had mentioned her involvement in arranging the fight, and her phone had pinged near the scene that morning. When confronted with this, Chavez stood by her story. "I didn't lend my car to anyone. I was running errands. I don't know what happened." At this stage, there was no clear confession, no one admitting to pulling the trigger, no one admitting to planning the violence. But there were contradictions, time gaps, and multiple references to the same names, circling back again and again: Elizabeth, Angelo, and Chavez. Detectives weren't ready to make arrests yet, but they were ready to go deeper. In the days following the shooting, detectives turned to digital forensics. They reviewed phone records, location data, and messages exchanged in the hours leading up to Jay's death. Cell tower data confirmed something they'd suspected. Angelo's phone was in the alley at the time of the shooting. He left the area minutes later. The gold sedan, registered to Elizabeth Chavez, was also linked to a matching departure route, captured on a nearby business security camera. Still, none of this identified a shooter, none of it confirmed who brought the gun, and no one was talking, until a phone call from the jail changed the direction of the case. Angelo had been detained temporarily for questioning. While in custody, he made a phone call to his mother. The conversation was recorded. In the call, Angelo didn't confess to the shooting, but he made several comments that suggested deeper involvement. At one point, he said, "They're not gonna believe me. They already think I did it." His mother, Chavez, replied, "Because your mom messed up. That's what I told them. Because I'm stupid. Period." The tone of the call wasn't aggressive. It wasn't panicked. It sounded like resignation. It sounded like someone who no longer believed the story they had built could hold. Detectives reviewed the full recording. They noted how Chavez never once asked who had fired the gun, or what had happened, or why. The assumption throughout the call was that both of them already knew. This wasn't a confession, not in legal terms, but it introduced doubt about the version of events Chavez had provided earlier. She had claimed to be at the laundromat. She had denied lending her car. She had said she didn't know a fight was happening. But now, in a recorded call, she was describing herself as stupid, as someone who had messed up, and she wasn't talking about laundry. Detectives began re-interviewing other individuals mentioned in the texts. One of Jay's friends told police that Chavez had been involved in organizing the fight, that she had been aware of it the night before. She told Angelo to handle it, like take care of it. I heard her say it. Another said she had driven some of the teens to the area. These were statements, not sworn testimony. And they didn't prove she knew a gun would be there, but they began to reshape the scope of the investigation. This was no longer just about a fight between teenagers. It was becoming a case about who facilitated it, who allowed it to happen, and who failed to stop it when they had the chance. It had been 5 weeks since Jay was killed. The investigation had revealed phone records, text messages, and one recorded phone call. Together, they outlined the basic shape of what had happened that morning behind Lindy's diner. A fight had been planned. Jay believed it would be one-on-one, but someone brought a gun, and someone pulled the trigger. On April 13, 2022, prosecutors filed their first charge. Angelo Baldonado, age 16, was charged with an open count of murder. In New Mexico, an open count means the exact degree of homicide will be determined later, based on evidence presented in court. He was also charged with tampering with evidence and unlawful possession of a handgun by a person under 19. He was taken into custody at the Juvenile Detention Center. At the time of his arrest, no firearm had been recovered. No eyewitness had identified him as the shooter. But prosecutors believed they had enough to move forward. Angelo's attorney issued a statement. "My client is a minor. He did not fire the weapon. He was not armed. He was present, but this was not his plan. The family did not comment publicly. 2 months later, there was another development. Elizabeth Chavez, Angelo's mother, was arrested and charged with murder. The charge was based on what prosecutors called active participation in planning the event that led to the victim's death. It was not a direct allegation that she pulled the trigger. It was a recognition of her alleged role in setting the confrontation in motion. Her arrest followed the release of additional phone data and witness statements that further tied her to the planning of the fight. One witness, interviewed a second time, said Chavez had used the phrase, "Let them handle it. He needs to be taught a lesson." Another indicated that she had driven some of the teens to the location, or at least had allowed her car to be used. When asked again about her car, Chavez declined to speak to detectives further. No single piece of evidence proved intent. There was no video of the shooting, no recovered firearm, no definitive account of how the confrontation escalated. But the timeline of messages, movements, and interviews, along with the jail call, led the district attorney's office to conclude that Chavez had facilitated the events of that day. Both Angelo and Chavez were now in custody, 2 members of the same family, facing the same charge, murder. By the time the case reached the courtroom, public interest had started to fade. But inside the courthouse, the questions were just beginning. 2 people were facing murder charges, a 16-year-old boy and his mother. Their cases were related, but handled separately. Angelo's defense argued that he had been mischaracterized, that he was present but not responsible for what happened, that someone else may have brought the weapon, and that his mother was being used as a scapegoat for a moment of violence that no one could fully explain. But prosecutors saw it differently. They believed Angelo had participated in setting up the meeting with Jay, that he knew others would be present, and that, at minimum, he created the conditions in which the shooting occurred. The key issue was intent, not whether Angelo fired the gun, but whether he had helped plan a confrontation that turned deadly. Elizabeth Chavez, his mother, initially pled not guilty. Her attorney argued that she hadn't encouraged violence, that she didn't know a weapon would be involved, that any comments she made were taken out of context, and that she was being unfairly targeted because she was the adult closest to the situation. But the timeline was difficult to ignore. The text messages, the references in interviews, the car, the jail phone call, all of it pointed to a pattern, that Chavez was aware of the meeting and at the very least chose not to intervene. In late 2023, Chavez accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison. She gave no public statement. There was no press conference, only a line in the court record confirming her decision. Angelo's case continued into early 2024. He also entered into a plea agreement. He pled no contest to second-degree murder, acknowledging his role in setting up the confrontation, but not admitting to firing a weapon. He was sentenced to 4 years in juvenile detention, with the possibility of early release based on behavior. There was no trial, no cross-examination, no final moment in court where everything was made clear. Just 2 people from the same household quietly accepting legal responsibility for what happened in that alley. Jay's family did not speak publicly. There was no victim impact statement on the record. The case closed without a clear answer to who fired the gun. But for the court, it was enough to know that both defendants had helped create the conditions in which someone died. After the sentences were handed down, there were no headlines, no follow-up stories, no public statements, no social media campaigns. The case faded into the background, as most do. But what didn't fade was the absence. Jay was 16 when he died. He was a student, a dishwasher, an expectant father. His son was born that November. He'll never meet him. There is no record of a formal memorial, no indication that Jay's family held a public service. His name appears in court filings, in the police report, and in a few archive news stories. But there is little else. In the years that followed, the case left behind a few fragments. A boy who grew up without a father. A mother serving nearly 2 decades. A teenage brother whose adolescence ended inside a detention center. 3 lives altered permanently by something that lasted less than 10 minutes. There's no simple way to summarize what happened. This wasn't a single mistake. It wasn't a single act. It was a chain of small decisions, some made out of anger, some out of silence, some out of fear. No one pulled the trigger in public. No one held up a sign announcing their intentions. But the confrontation happened anyway. And once it began, it couldn't be undone. In criminal law, responsibility is assigned. Charges are filed. Plea deals are made. Time is served. But legal closure is not the same as understanding. And understanding requires questions that the courtroom doesn't always have time to ask. This story is one of many. And in some ways, that's the most important thing to understand. It wasn't the first time a teenager died in an alley. It wasn't the first time a fight turned into something more. And it wasn't the first time the people involved didn't think it would go that far. There was no grand conspiracy, no elaborate plan. Just conversations that could have stopped, warnings that could have been heeded, adults who could have stepped in, but didn't. And when it was over, no one knew what to say. Jay had people who cared about him. He had a job. He had a child on the way. But in the moments that mattered, those things weren't enough to protect him. The people closest to him didn't pull him back. Some may have pushed him forward. Some may have looked the other way. Not with malice, not necessarily, but with distance, with detachment. These patterns repeat themselves. Over time, across neighborhoods, across generations, a conflict begins. It escalates slowly. People assume it'll burn out on its own. But then something crosses the line, and someone doesn't walk away. Jay didn't bring a gun. He didn't wear body armor. He wasn't looking for a war. He walked into an alley thinking he knew the rules. But someone else decided the rules didn't matter, and that's what killed him. There's no single person to blame for what happened, but there were opportunities to change its course. A text that could have gone unanswered. A ride that could have been refused. A meeting that didn't have to happen. The story of Jay's death isn't just about one decision. It's about the space where many small decisions came together, and no one stopped them. There are no easy endings in cases like this. Only records, only sentences, and the question that lingers, what would have happened if someone, anyone, had chosen differently?